Hello friends, and this is good news that we have reached the end of our series today, and today being the last lecture of the topics that we have been covering in the last year. That's why I don't mention a particular author in this lecture. The title is Modern Drama, Meaning and Relevance. And I raised these two issues. I have raised these two issues earlier also broadly, but today we can precisely talk about what is the meaning of modern drama and what is its relevance to us. Meaning is something that is hidden in all the texts and in the writers, in their minds. Meaning is hidden in the words that the writer uses, sometimes unknowingly, sometimes half-knowingly, and therefore it is our job as focused students of literature and academics to find out those hidden meanings and even to interpret some of the gaps, some of the lapses, some of the absences that the dramatist either deliberately leaves or unknowingly lets them escape. So that meaning is very troublesome in our own time, particularly because literature is supposed to, for most of us, entertain us. But then in that entertainment is hidden something else, and that is what I call meaning. So far as relevance is concerned, there is a whole batch of writers in the 20th century, in the 21st century, which is haunted by the idea of whether he or she would be listened to, would arouse a kind of curiosity among the audience, and if the writer makes it big, starts appealing to the people who read him or her, who read her or his presentations on the stage, and if they do so, then of course they would find it useful. So relevance is usefulness. You should be useful to the readers and to the viewers if you plan to write a play, write a poem, write a novel, write a short story, or even write a statement. In all those things, there is a kind of usefulness that is generally in the mind of the viewer or reader. So these two things have to be kept in mind when we discuss the modern drama, and I'm sure that as me and my friends in the team drew your attention to the dramatic works of the 20th century and talked about the texts, talked about the messages that the text contained, then that purpose is broadly served. But today being the last lecture, let's have a second look at some of the important authors that I covered, and I'll request my own team also, team members, to do the same, that the texts or writers that they have covered, they should talk in general about them. So I think I have already drawn parameters of today's discussion. It will be about a few authors whom I consider of greater relevance than many others, and let's see what we gained from them and what questions we saw being raised by them in the process of talking about them, discussing them. So let's have a look, let's have a view each of the following authors. I don't refer to all the authors, but the significant ones in my opinion, particularly in the context of the 20th century. So that selection has gone into the picking up of these authors, even at the stage of deciding. And today we have a second look at some of those important authors. So let's begin with the idea of William Butler Yeats. One thing that I say in the beginning itself, that most of these writers, most of these dramatists were born in the latter half of the 18th century, and they were most active in the 20th century. So it is incidental. The second half would not exactly mean the 50s of the 19th century, but generally 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. So these writers were born then. They looked around for answers to the questions that they confronted, and they started writing the plays, and they came into their own, and they bloomed as dramatists in the early years of the 20th century, which century
saw many upheavals and decisive crucial changes in those years. You remember that even as the 20th century opened, there were clouds of war, hovering over the not just the material atmosphere, but also the cultural and ideological atmosphere. So this is that category where you live, you carry a baggage of the 19th century, the baggage of problems, the baggage of important issues, which are being grappled with by not merely the upper masses, upper classes, but also the rest of the population. So I begin with this point in the context of Yeats, that he brought into being an Irish theatrical renaissance and aimed to achieve a poetical or legendary drama. So this kind of a drama, we generally see that writers talk about, poetical part of life through the dramas. This happened, as early as the 16th, 17th centuries when Shakespeare wrote his poetical plays. After that, poetry has been the part and parcel of dramatic writing. Sometimes people, break into prose, but that prose also is poetic in nature. And legendary, here it means the reference to legends, that you hear the great tales of the past, important tales of the past, that past which otherwise is not available to you, but it is there in the social memory. And people, when they sit a bit idle, when they talk in a leisurely way, then they refer to those legends that they heard about, and some of them they saw being made in their own time also. And W.B. Yeats thought that he should present these poetical aspects of the past, and particularly the legends in his dramas, and this was a job that he assigned to himself. For him, this would have no realistic or elaborate, but only symbolic and decorative setting, which means that he is not bothered about, at that point of time, realism, that what you see, that you comment on, but that what you see symbolizes something. It's a symbol of something. It's a symbol of an idea. It's a symbol of an approach. It's a symbol of a tale that may have taken place materially, actually, a few hundred years ago. So Yeats thought that he would be using the symbolic language to help the reader from the point of view of the present, have a leap backwards to see how life was lived in the previous periods. So what is the meaning of decorative here? That the setting is decorative. He's deliberately making it more attractive, more appealing in the context of writing, and that is his distinctive feature. So that's how we discussed drama in the 20th century in terms of the symbolism, in terms of the heavy phrases, heavy pictures that the writers used in order to evoke an experience that existed sometime in the past. So Yeats, he let it be known that the acting should have an equivalent distance to that of the play from common realities. So acting is not there on the stage just because you have to appreciate it. It has to be there at a distance from actual life. So this point has been generally considered in the context of mid-20th century plays, particularly in the case of Beckett. My team member talked about it there. But then Yeats was one of the first who drew a line between what he says and what he refers to in the larger sense. And he said distance, not merely distance, he said equivalent distance, equal distance to that of the play from common realities. So when you see a play, then you should be feeling that you are watching a play. You are not face to face with an actual situation. And if there are tears in your eyes, if there is laughter, then that laughter and tears, those merely are incidental. But what is important is that the stage is not like life. Stage is not like the conditions that you face in your real life. And Yeats, therefore, used poetry, used symbolism to create that kind of a distance. And he called it equivalent distance. In Purgatory, I referred to this play in the main lecture, but here I just remind you of the discussion of Purgatory in that lecture. This was written in 1939. Imagine the man is born in the second half of the 19th century, and in the 20th century, in 39, and he would soon die. He would be a mature person at that point of time, and even the year of death is significant in so many different ways. One is that that's the year in which the Second World War would begin. So he's talking about Purgatory. He's talking about a place which purges you of all the sins of your life, of my life, and you can't be allowed to enter heaven or paradise unless you have been purged of all the dross, all the dirt that you collected in the context of living a particular life. So he gave it this very extraordinary name, Purgatory, and Yeats projected the destruction of an honored house, which for generations hosted nobility and held within it books and tools of learning. That's the kind of value system that Yeats loved. Yeats found appealing, that you should have books in your house, and you should have other tools of learning. There can be paintings, there can be musical instruments, and there is a whole tradition of learning and using those tools of learning, or tools of that's what it's called. So this house, which is there only in memory, it has been destroyed in the early 20th century, and Yeats is sad about it. Yeats wants to keep it preserved in his memory, in his own mind, and he keeps reminding, and he would remind through this play also, such a house where people valued books, people valued ideas, and this house is now, it was an honored house. People looked up to this house. In the neighborhood, people would just say, oh, this is the kind of house that we should have in life also, and we should take a great appeal from there. So it's an honored house. It's a house which has earned honors, and this house was symbol for years of the loss of Ireland's great houses. So Ireland is supposed to be an ordinary place today by people, but in Yeats's time, it was being destroyed systematically by certain forces. I don't have to go into the nature and character of those forces, and Yeats was troubled by the destruction of such a house. The house is not a house in this case; it's an institution. The house, is a kind of a treasure that he's supposed to protect. But what can he do? So these houses were destroyed systematically in the early part of the 20th century and latter half of the 19th century, and he was sad, and he would keep reminding people that you have a great history and try to preserve it. So history and tradition, mostly we post these two words to counter modernity. Yeats doesn't have that direct intention, but he is in love with history. He is in love with the past, and he picks up certain good, valued traditions from there, and he wants to preserve them. He wants people to take guidance from the great traditions of the past, and they are important concerns for Yeats, the dramatist. In another play, The Death of Cuchulainn, also written in 1939, the protagonist is the producer of the play. Now, just consider this, that there is a different kind of drama that is being written by W.B. Yeats, and the producer and the protagonist is the hero, the main character. So the main character takes the control of the play himself and produces it. Don't you think it's a great experience that in a film, there's a character called, let's say, protagonist Dilip Kumar in Indian conditions, and he starts, asking other characters to behave in a certain manner. That is, in fact, the job of the producer or the director. But then Yeats is experimenting with the idea of giving the role of the producer to the protagonist. So this is the kind of topsy-turvy things that Yeats is interested in sharing with the audience, and see their response to this unexpected turn of events in the play. In these two plays, we confront the hauntings and disconcerting shifts of the time perspective. You know, the time perspective, past and present, and the past haunts you all the time. You know, hangs heavy on your mind, wants to pull you into itself so that you don't escape into the present. So you are haunted all the time, and then disconcerting shifts occur. You are in the past, suddenly you are in the present. Then you go back to the past. This change of position in time, this is the time perspective that Yeats is capturing in his writing. Okay, that was an important point concerning the past, presented by W.B. Yeats in his plays, and now we shift to another playwright, that is John Millington Synge, and he is also a contemporary of W.B. Yeats. Another common thing between the two is that they come from the same social national background. Both of them are Irish, and Synge underplayed, I say, conventional action. He of course will bring in convention, but he will underplay it. He will not emphasize it, and conventional action actually will be replaced in his play by some kind of a storm, some kind of an unreality, some kind of an illusion. So there is a convention that has been held, important by people, but then you forget about it, you push it in the background, and you start talking about things, which are modern, which are happening, and those things are not very clear in their shape. So that's what Synge is talking about. His attention was not focused on ritual. Ritual means that there is a convention, something that happened 200 years ago is still being kept up alive as a ritual, and Synge was apprehensive about the negative effects of such a thing in his writing. He brought to the fore the distinctive ways of speaking which echo the rhythms of the English of Western Ireland, a language molded by an underlying Gaelic syntax. So, in fact, he is a very conscious writer at the level of language, and he comes from England, and he comes from Ireland. And in Ireland, there is a dialect that is quite close to the Scottish dialect. And imagine the courage of Synge to use such a language to communicate his message to the audience. So he's writing in English, he's writing in Irish English, and he in fact is writing in the Irish dialect that is closer not to English but to Scotland, to the Scottish language, and that creates a kind of stir in the audience, because they like this language. They like the use of words. They mean one thing in English, and they mean slightly something different in Irish or Gaelic, and he is using it, not just consciously, but also amusingly, and that creates an impact that can't be easily, forgotten or put elsewhere than the focus. So I talked about this play at length in the original lecture, and the play was The Playboy of the Western World, and then the protagonist of this play is Christy Mahon, who comes from outside. Whether he is a playboy or not, a person who is a romantic hero in the rural landscape of Ireland, that's a separate question. But this person comes from outside. He stays at a place in Ireland near the sea, and everybody is talking about him. There are the girls who are taking interest in him. There are men who are curious about him, and he is not easily absorbed in the culture that prevails there. But then he creates a stir, and people start rethinking their positions in life, and that is the crux of this play that Synge, talked about. So, what one message that Synge might be, conveying to the audience is that there has to be a clash of cultures. there has to be a clash of perspectives, and that clash should be realized. In fact, this clash occurred in the second half of the 19th century and the early part of the 20th century at the level of Europe, at the level of the world. I don't have to tell you about what was happening in the colonial world at that point of time, because there we saw this kind of a clash much more clearly. But then, getting back to the play is in fact teasing you out of your complacency, so that the kind of thing that he is presenting is made clear. Then we come to Bernard Shaw, and I'll discuss it in the discussion that follows. But Bernard Shaw was also taken up, and interestingly again, Bernard Shaw too was an Irish writer, coming from Ireland, writing in English. But did he fall into the same pattern as his compatriots, that is W.B. Yeats and Synge? No. Bernard Shaw cannot be easily spotted as a writer with the background in Ireland. He's an admirer, in fact, he's an admirer of the Norwegian dramatist Ibsen, and he wrote a book, in 1912, which is the quintessence of Ibsenism, and in fact, he's learning his important lessons there. So, we'll be talking about him in brief in the following discussion. And George Bernard Shaw was a name to reckon with, not merely in England and Europe, but all over the world. In fact, arguably, he might have read, more, with greater curiosity in countries like India, in colonies which are far away from England, and he was, in his own way, more critical about British imperialism, and he saw it, as a kind of a threat, which was, exposed to the audience. So I hope these two playwrights and the third that we'll be, discussing a little more in this lecture have already, created some questions in your mind. So please think about them, and we immediately would take Shaw as an example of a different kind of writing. Thank you.